With my son not answering his phone for 2 weeks, I decided to go to his house unannounced. But when I got there, I noticed something moving under my grandson's bed. When the police lifted the mattress, what we found sent a chill down everyone's spine. Because I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it's reached. I still remember it perfectly. On that fateful day, I took the first bus heading to Austin. During the 3-hour ride, I didn't say a single word. My gaze fixed on the window and my heart in a knot. I kept telling myself to calm down, but my hands were shaking as I held the ticket. When I got off at the bus terminal, it was already getting dark. I walked as fast as I could toward the quiet street where Daniel lived, down the same path I'd taken dozens of times to visit him and Matthew, my grandson. But this time, every step felt heavy, like I was walking into a nightmare. Standing in front of the familiar wooden door, I knocked, first gently, then harder and harder. "Daniel, Matthew!" I shouted, but my voice cracked in the cold air. No one answered. I put my hand on the doorknob just to try my luck, but when I turned it slightly, the door swung open. It was unlocked. My heart started pounding a mile a minute. Daniel never left the door unlocked. He was so careful, especially when Matthew was home. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, holding my breath, as if the slightest sound could shatter everything into a million pieces. Inside, the scene I saw left me frozen. The living room was a mess, like there had been a fight. The sofa was pushed out of place, as if someone had shoved it in a rage. On the floor, a coffee cup was broken into 1,000 pieces. The shards of white porcelain mixed with the dark, dried coffee stain. I stepped over it, my legs trembling, trying not to step on the glass. In the kitchen, I saw the big water cooler jug lying on its side, and several empty water bottles were rolling around on the floor, without their caps, as if someone had chucked them down in desperation. The smell of dampness and the silence of the house gave me the chills. I went upstairs, feeling like I was dragging a stone with each step. My heart was beating so loud I could hear it pounding in my ears. I opened the door to Daniel's home office, empty. His bedroom too, the bed still made, but with no sign of life. Finally, I reached Matthew's room. "Matthew, where are you, my boy?" I called out, my voice hoarse. No one answered. I stood in the middle of the room, looking at his toys, the Lego blocks, his old teddy bear, and I felt like my heart was going to break. Suddenly, a small noise came from under the bed. A scraping sound, like a plastic bottle rolling on the wood floor. I froze stiff, and a shiver ran down my entire spine. My heart was beating even faster, so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. There was something under the bed. I wanted to bend down and look, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I took a step back, grabbing the edge of a desk with a trembling hand to keep from falling. "Matthew," I called out again, but only silence answered me, except for that little noise, quiet but clear, like a warning. Panic took over. I ran out of the house, my hands shaking so much that I had to dial 911 3 times just to get it right. My son is missing. He hasn't contacted me in 2 weeks. I nearly screamed into the phone, my voice breaking. "There's a strange noise. Under my grandson's bed," I stammered, not even sure what I was saying. I just knew I needed someone to come, and fast. In less than 10 minutes, the red and blue lights of a patrol car lit up the window. I led the 2 police officers to Matthew's room, and with a trembling finger I pointed at the bed. "Under there," I whispered, not daring to look. A tall young officer knelt down and said in a firm voice, "Is anyone under there?" A heavy silence, so sick it was hard to breathe, filled the room. Then without another word, the 2 officers lifted the bed in one motion, and there I saw him. It was Matthew, my grandson, curled up underneath. He was rail thin, his hair matted with sweat and his clothes filthy, giving off a sour smell. He was clutching an empty water bottle, his eyes wide open, expressionless, as if he was seeing a world I couldn't reach. I just stood there paralyzed, feeling my heart stop. The 2 officers were also in shock, unable to say a word. I fell to my knees, wanting to hug him, but my hands were shaking so much I didn't dare touch him. "Matthew, my boy," I whispered, tears welling up. He didn't respond, just stayed there clinging to his bottle as if it were the last thing keeping him alive. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew this nightmare was just beginning. My name is Elena, I'm 61 years old, and I live alone in a small town just outside of Austin. My story begins one morning in late October, when I first realized that Daniel was missing. It was 2 eternal weeks during which I lived with an unanswered anguish. The first day, I called Daniel to see how he was, like always. I was sitting at the kitchen table, phone in hand, listening to it ring over and over until it went to voicemail. No answer. I sent him a text, a short one. "Are you okay, son?" But the message just sat there, undelivered. I started to feel a knot in my stomach, like something was wrong. But I told myself he was probably busy, that his battery died, or that he was somewhere with no service. Daniel is an independent man, always has been, so I tried to calm my worries. But in the following days, that worry grew, like a slow fire burning inside me. I called him at the oddest hours, at dawn, late at night, even at noon, when I knew he usually took his break. And always just silence. I left him voicemails, my voice trembling. "Daniel, where are you? Call me, please. I'm so worried." But they too were lost in the void, with no sign he'd ever heard them. I started to fear the worst. Daniel wasn't the type to just disappear without a word. He always called me every week, told me about his work, about Matthew, my grandson, about the normal days of a dad and his son. This silence was not like him at all. By the 5th day, I couldn't take it anymore. The anxiety was eating me up inside. I tried calling his home phone, hoping to hear his voice, or at least Matthew's, that 8-year-old boy who never stopped telling me everything about school. But I only heard the phone ring and ring in an empty house until I hung up. I opened the messaging app that kids use and wrote to Matthew. "My boy, where are you? Call Grandma." The message sent, but the read receipt never appeared. I felt my heart sink. Matthew is little, but he knows how to use a phone, and he loves his grandma very much. He always answered as soon as he saw a message from me. I started calling Daniel's friends and co-workers. They were all surprised, their voices hesitant. "I haven't seen Daniel all week," a co-worker told me. I thought he was on vacation. A close friend of his said, "The last time we talked was last month. Daniel told me he was swamped with work." Nobody knew anything else. The more I asked, the more I felt like I was lost in a void with no answers. Daniel is not the type to disappear without notice. He's a dedicated father, a caring son. Something had to have happened. On the 10th day, I couldn't stand the waiting any longer. I looked up the neighbors who lived near Daniel's house, calling every number I had. They sighed on the other end of the phone, their voices full of pity. An elderly woman who lives across the street from Daniel told me that last week, on the night of the storm, she saw the light in Daniel's house suddenly turn on and then off. "I just figured the young man turned on the light to go to bed," she said. But her voice was trembling, as if she also felt something wasn't right. Her words stabbed me in the heart like a knife. The night of the storm, a light that turns on and off. Something was very wrong, I was sure of it. 2 weeks went by, and all my efforts were for nothing. Not a text, not a call, not a sign. I couldn't sleep. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling, imagining all sorts of things. Did Daniel have an accident? Was he kidnapped? Or did he just want to go somewhere? But no, Daniel would never leave Matthew. He was his whole world. And Matthew, my grandson, where was he? The more I thought, the harder it was to breathe. I couldn't just sit on my hands for another minute. I decided to go to Daniel's house, and what I found only made my anguish grow. Now, I'm sitting in the dim light of a hospital room, my hands clutching the edge of the chair, as if letting go would make the whole world collapse. Matthew is lying in the bed, his small body almost lost in the white sheets. A police officer carried him in his arms from that cold house, and I, like a soulless shadow, ran after them. My hands were shaking when I touched him, wanting to hug him but not daring to hold him tight for fear of hurting him. Matthew didn't react, not a blink, not a sigh. His little hands were squeezing the empty water bottle, as if it were the last thing tethering him to this life. The patrol car flew through the dark streets of Austin, the sound of the siren echoing in the night. I sat next to Matthew, fanning him with a piece of paper I found in the house while gently patting his back. "Matthew, Grandma's here," I whispered to him, my voice cracking. But the boy remained like a living statue, his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. I kept asking myself, what happened to my grandson? And to Daniel? That trashed house, the empty water bottle, and the noise under the bed. It was all like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. At the hospital, the doctors and nurses rushed Matthew into the emergency room immediately. I stayed outside, my hands pressed against the glass of the door, watching them move quickly around him. The sound of the machines mixed with the hurried voices of the doctors. "No external injuries. Severe malnutrition. Severe dehydration. Signs of psychological trauma." Every word was like a stab to the heart. Psychological trauma. My 8-year-old grandson, that boy who always smiled like the morning sun, was now lying there, so thin, like a dry leaf that could blow away at any moment. A little while later, the doctor let me in. They had already put Matthew on an IV, with a thin tube connected to his skinny little arm. His eyes were still open, but they weren't looking at me, but at some distant place, a place I couldn't reach. I took his cold little hand and called his name. "Matthew, it's me, Grandma. Wake up, please, say something." But the boy didn't respond. He didn't even blink. I sat beside him on the bed and the tears started to fall. I remembered the days when Matthew was little, when he would run around my yard, laughing his head off, asking me to tell him stories from when I was young in Mexico City. Now that smile was gone, and in its place was a frightening silence, as if my grandson had locked his soul away. The police also came to the hospital with their notepads and their questions. A young, serious-looking officer sat down next to me. "Mrs. Elena, could you tell us when you last had contact with Mr. Daniel?" I shook my head, a lump in my throat. "It's been 2 weeks," I said, my voice trembling. "I called him, I sent him messages, I did everything but nothing. Daniel would never do something like this. He always called me, at least once a week." The officer took notes, nodding, and then turned to ask the doctor about Matthew's condition. They spoke in low voices. "The victim shows no life-threatening injuries, but he is in a state of severe post-traumatic shock." Hearing those words, I felt like a stone was crushing my chest. Post-traumatic shock. What did Matthew have to live through to end up like this? I wanted to demand answers, but the officer just took notes and told me, "We're going to open a missing persons report. Could you come with us to the station to give a full statement?" I shook my head, almost pleading, "Let me stay with my grandson. I can't leave him alone right now." They nodded, agreeing, but their eyes were full of concern, as if they too felt the dark shadow hanging over my family. That night, I sat by the bed, watching Matthew tremble as he slept in fits and starts. He clutched the empty water bottle tightly, even in his sleep, as if he was afraid someone would take it from him. Sweat ran down his forehead, soaking the pillow. Every now and then he would jolt awake, his eyes wide with terror, but he wouldn't say anything, just look at me with that empty gaze. I wiped his forehead with a small towel, my hand shaking. "Grandma's here with you," I whispered, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. The doctor came to check on him, a middle-aged woman with a kind look in her eyes. She placed her hand on my shoulder and said in a soft voice, "Mrs. Elena, the boy needs time. He went through a very big shock. Be patient, you'll see. He'll tell us what happened." I nodded, but inside I felt a terrible heaviness. Patience? How could I be patient when Daniel was still missing, when Matthew was here, a shadow of his former self? I spent the whole night sitting there, holding Matthew's hand, listening to his weak breathing. I remembered the last time I spoke to Daniel on the phone. His voice sounded tired, but he still tried to laugh. "Mom, I'm fine. It's just that work has been a little heavy." I didn't realize how heavy it was. I didn't ask more questions. Now I blamed myself. If I had paid more attention, if I had called sooner, would things be different? 2 days passed and I didn't move from Matthew's bedside, as if taking my eyes off him for a second would make him disappear. Matthew was still there, small and fragile, his skinny little hands clutching a teddy bear a nurse had given him. I tried to feed him some broth, spoonful by spoonful, bringing it to his mouth, hoping he would eat something. "Eat, Matthew, my boy, so you can get strong and go home with Grandma," I whispered, my voice trembling. But the boy would barely swallow a couple of spoonfuls and then clamp his mouth shut, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. Every night was the same. Matthew had nightmares. Sometimes he would sit up suddenly in bed, his mouth open as if he wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. I would hug him, rock him, and softly sing him the lullaby I used to sing to Daniel when he was a baby. But Matthew would just tremble, sweat soaking his forehead. I'd wipe his brow, my hand shaking so much the washcloth would fall. I asked a psychologist to come, a young woman with a very gentle voice. She sat next to Matthew, took his hand, and asked him soft questions. "Matthew, do you want to tell me something about your dad? Or about anything you saw?" But the boy just hugged his teddy bear tighter, his eyes on the floor, without saying a word. I stood to the side, my heart in my throat. "Will he talk again, doctor?" I asked, almost begging. The psychologist looked at me with compassion. "Mrs. Elena, he needs time. The shock was too much for a child. But I'm sure he will open up. It's just not the right time yet." I nodded, but inside, I couldn't be calm. Time? I didn't know how much time I had left to wait, with Daniel missing and every passing day being a torture of anxiety and pain. On the morning of the third day, I was cleaning Matthew's face, gently wiping a damp cloth over his thin cheeks. I tried to smile and started telling him an old story about Daniel, about when he was a boy and broke one of my vases and tried to tape it back together. "Your dad was so silly, Matthew," I said in a soft voice. "But he loved you more than anything in the world." Matthew didn't answer, but I saw his little fingers tighten around the teddy bear, as if he were holding on to something. I was about to continue when the phone in my purse vibrated. The caller ID showed the police station's number. My heart pounded. A bad feeling washed over me. I answered, my hand shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. The police chief's voice on the other end was grave, very different from his usual calm demeanor. "Mrs. Elena, I need you to prepare yourself. We just used luminol to re-examine Mr. Daniel's house, and we found a very large amount of blood in the living room." My ears started ringing, as if the world had suddenly gone silent. The washcloth in my hand fell to the floor. I couldn't feel my own hands. "Blood?" I repeated, my voice breaking. The chief continued, and every word was like a knife in my heart. "It's highly probable that we're dealing with a homicide. The crime scene has been secured pending DNA results." I was barely processing what he was saying, not fully understanding his words, when Matthew tugged hard on my sleeve. I turned and saw his little eyes, red and full of tears, as if he had heard everything. And then, after so many days of silence, Matthew burst into tears, a gut-wrenching cry that shattered the calm of the hospital room. "Dad, he's dead," he cried out, his voice small but full of pain, as if his entire world had just collapsed. I fell back into the chair, hugging him with all my might, as tears streamed down my cheeks. "No, Matthew, no, it's not like that," I told him, but I didn't even believe my own words. His words, so few, had been like a hammer blow to my heart. Matthew's cries could be heard through the phone, and the chief said quickly, "Ma'am, stay calm. We're on our way to the hospital now to take an initial statement. Please, don't move from there." I didn't answer. I just held Matthew tighter, letting my tears soak his clothes. The nurses and doctors rushed in, surely alerted by the crying. A young nurse knelt down and put her hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Elena, stay calm. Let us take care of the boy." But I shook my head, clutching Matthew tighter. "No, I have to be here with him," I said, my voice choked. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't leave him alone at this moment, not after he had just said those horrible words. The doctor checked Matthew and gave him a mild sedative to calm him down. He slowly stopped crying, but his eyes were still red, looking at me with a pain I couldn't soothe. I stroked his hair, whispering, "Grandma's here, Matthew. I'm not going anywhere." But inside, I felt like I was falling into an abyss. If Daniel was really... I couldn't bring myself to finish the thought. I remembered the last time I saw my son. when he came to visit me in my town, bringing me a corn cake that I love so much. "Mom, take good care of yourself, okay?" he said with his bright smile. Now that smile felt like a distant memory, erased by the chief's words and Matthew's cries. An hour had passed since the chief called to tell me about the blood in Daniel's house, and now they were at the hospital with a recorder and a notepad. A young, tall, and thin police officer sat by the bed and said in a soft but careful voice, "Matthew, can you tell your grandma and us what happened?" I felt Matthew tremble in my arms. His thin little shoulders tensed up. He lowered his head, clutching the teddy bear in his hands as if holding on to something to keep from sinking. I stroked his hair and whispered, "It's okay, Matthew. You can tell us. Grandma's right here with you." I tried to make my voice sound calm, but inside, I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff. I was afraid of what he was going to say, but at the same time, I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. After a few minutes of silence, Matthew gave a slight nod, a movement so small it made my heart ache. I held my breath, squeezing his shoulder, and listened to his every broken, faint word, as if each one was a shattered piece of his soul. "That night, it was raining really hard," Matthew began, his voice trembling, almost a whisper. "I was playing with my Legos in my room, making a really tall tower that Dad said was the prettiest. And then, the doorbell rang, a bunch of times." Matthew paused, looking at his bear, squeezing it tighter. I got curious and went to see. Dad was at the door, looking through the peephole, and his face, it was really tense. I'd never seen him like that. A shiver ran down my spine. Daniel was always calm, always knew how to hide his worries to protect Matthew. What had scared him so much? Matthew continued, his voice getting quieter. Dad turned around and saw me standing there. He ran to me, knelt down, and whispered, "Matthew, get under the bed, quick. Don't come out until I call you. You hear me?" I was scared, but Dad pushed me toward my room in a hurry. I got under the bed, and Dad even pulled the comforter down to hide me, so no one could see me. I imagined my little boy, only 8 years old, huddled under the bed in the dark, not knowing what was happening, and I felt my heart clench. Through a little gap in the comforter, Matthew went on, I saw my mom come in with a really tall man. That man's face was so cold he didn't say anything, just stood there with his arms crossed behind my mom. I froze. Alicia, Matthew's mom, Daniel's ex-wife. I never thought she would come back, or rather, that she couldn't come back after everything that had happened. Matthew trembled and his voice broke. My mom looked all around the room and asked, "Where's Matthew?" I got so scared I thought she was going to find me. But my dad told her in a calm voice. He went to his grandma's when winter break started. I knew Dad was lying, but I didn't dare move. I felt hot tears roll down my cheeks. The officer didn't stop writing, his expression serious, but I saw his hand pause for a moment as Matthew continued. Then my mom started yelling at him. She was asking Dad for money. She said something about a debt that Dad had to pay if he didn't want trouble. But Dad shook his head and wouldn't give her any money. He told her she had gone too far, that she had bothered him enough. Hearing this broke my heart. Daniel had tried to escape Alicia's shadow, had tried to build a new life for himself and Matthew, but she had returned, bringing trouble with her. Matthew stopped, breathing heavily, as if the memory was dragging him back to that night of terror. I rubbed his back and whispered, "Take it easy, my boy. Grandma's here." The boy took a deep breath and continued. Dad, my mom, and the tall man started fighting really bad. My mom was screaming, and the other man got closer, saying something like a threat. I didn't hear it clearly, but I saw him push my dad. Dad stumbled back, and then he pushed him harder. Dad fell and hit his head on the corner of the table. There was a really loud thump, and red water started coming out. Matthew was shaking uncontrollably, hiding his face in my chest, and he burst into tears. I saw Dad lying there not moving. I wanted to come out. I wanted to call him, but I was scared. I was so scared. I hugged him with all my might, my tears soaking his hair. The image of Daniel falling replayed in my mind like a nightmare. The officer across from me stopped writing and looked at me with compassion. "This statement is very important, Mrs. Elena," he said in a grave voice. "We will investigate this as a possible homicide. The boy has been very brave." I nodded, but inside I felt an emptiness that nothing could fill. Matthew kept crying, his sobs like knives in my heart. I looked at the officer and said with a choked voice, "Are you going to find her? Alicia and that man?" He nodded, his voice firm. "We will do everything we can. Mrs. Elena, I promise you that." When the police left, I stayed there, holding Matthew, feeling the shadow of tragedy that had just fallen over my family. That night, after the police left, I couldn't sleep a wink. Matthew's quiet sobs echoed in the room like stabs to my heart. He moved his lips, calling for his dad in his dreams, in a voice so faint I had to lean in close to hear it. Each time he did, I would wipe his face with a warm washcloth, hoping to soothe even just a little the pain he was carrying. But as I touched his cold skin, old memories came rushing back, hurting as if someone were pouring salt on a wound that had never healed. I remember Daniel when he was young, in his 20s, his career just starting, his eyes full of faith in the future. I remember the pride with which he introduced me to Alicia, with a smile that shone like the summer sun. "Mom, this is Alicia," he told me, his voice full of pride. "She's going to be my wife." Alicia back then was a good girl, a bit clumsy, but always trying to do things right. She would blush when I taught her how to make tamales, and I remember thinking, yes, this girl is good. She's going to make Daniel happy. The whole family loved her, not just for her warm smile, but for the way she looked at Daniel, as if he were her whole world. Then Matthew was born, and it was like a new light had been lit in our family. I still remember the day I took him out for a walk in the yard, with Matthew snuggled in my arms, his round little eyes looking at me with a grin from ear to ear. The neighbors would joke, "Mrs. Elena, you look 10 years younger." I would laugh, my heart full of joy. Daniel and Alicia were still happy back then. They would visit me often, bringing Matthew and their stories of their new life. I thought it would be like this forever, that our little family would always be full of laughter. But then everything started to fall apart. I remember the day I got a call from Daniel. His voice sounded dull, tired. "Mom, Alicia, she's gotten into gambling trouble." I froze. I couldn't believe that good girl had fallen into something like that. The first time, Daniel quietly sold the car he loved so much, the car he had saved for years, just to pay off his wife's debts. I saw him sitting in the yard, his eyes red, but he still tried to smile. "Mom, I'm going to be okay. I just want to help her." I took his hand, wanting to say something, but I stayed silent, because I understood that Daniel loved Alicia so much that he was willing to do anything to save her. But things didn't stop there. The second time, when the debt collectors came knocking on my door, making threats because Alicia couldn't pay, I had to take out all my savings. It was the money I had saved for my old age, but I didn't hesitate. "I just wanted to protect my family." "Mom, I'm sorry." Daniel told me that night, his voice choked. I didn't think things would get to this point. I hugged him and told him not to worry, that family was for supporting each other. But inside, I started to get scared. Alicia was no longer the good girl from before. With each passing day, she changed more. Alicia became irritable, capable of breaking plates over the smallest thing. I remember one time I went to visit and saw Matthew huddled in a corner. His eyes red because his mom had yelled at him just for spilling a glass of milk. Alicia was there, screaming at him, "You're just as clumsy as your father." I ran and got Matthew out of there, trying to calm her down, but she just laughed bitterly. "He's my son. I know how to raise him." Those words were like a stab to my heart. Matthew didn't deserve to endure those fits of rage. I looked at Daniel and saw him worn down. His eyes that once shone now only reflected exhaustion and helplessness. Many nights Daniel would call me, venting through tears. "Mom, I can't take it anymore," he would say, his voice trembling. "Alicia, she's not the woman I fell in love with anymore. I'm afraid she's going to hurt Matthew." Hearing him broke my heart, but I could only console him. "Son, if you need me, I'm here. I'll help you." Finally, Daniel decided to get a divorce and fight for custody of Matthew. The day the judge made the ruling, I saw him sigh in relief, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. I felt the same way. I thought that finally father and son would have a quiet life, that Matthew would grow up with Daniel's love without any more shouting or heavy debts. But I was wrong. Barely half a year later, Alicia returned, bringing with her a much worse nightmare. The story Matthew told me about that stormy night, about how Daniel fell and lay motionless on the floor, kept replaying in my head. Alicia, the woman I once loved like a daughter, the one who was my grandson's mother, had become a stranger, a cruel person. Sitting in the darkness of the hospital room, I watched Matthew sleep and I heard him sob, his lips still moving to call for his Dade. I made a promise to myself, Daniel, I'm going to get justice for you. I'm going to protect Matthew, no matter what it costs. The next morning, the sun streamed through the hospital window, but it couldn't take away the chill I felt inside. I sat next to Matthew, watching him sleep soundly after the sedative. His little face looked calmer, but the mark of pain was still there, impossible to erase. The phone vibrated. It was a call from the police station. The chief, in a grave but firm voice, told me, Mrs. Elena, we have new information. Could you come to the station right now? I nodded even though he couldn't see me, and I whispered to Matthew, Grandma will be out for a little while. Be good. The nurse will take care of you. I left my grandson with a young nurse, whom I had gotten to know over these past few days, and hurried out of the hospital, my mind in a turmoil. On the bus ride to the station, I stared out the window, seeing nothing but the image of Daniel falling in Matthew's story. I clutched my shawl in my hands, trying to hold back the tears. When I entered the meeting room at the station, the chief, a middle-aged man with a piercing gaze, was already waiting for me. He spread a large map on the table and pointed to several red-marked spots around Daniel's house. We have a new lead, he said, his voice confident. A neighbor's security camera recorded a suspicious pickup truck on the night of the storm. I held my breath, my heart pounding as he played the video on the screen. The image was blurry and shaky due to the poor quality, but I could still clearly see a dark pickup parked in front of Daniel's house. Under the faint streetlight, I could make out the shape of something long covered with a tarp in the back. Minutes later, this truck left. The chief continued, pointing to another video. We can't see the license plates clearly, they're blurry, but the model matches one used by a local gang of loan sharks. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Matthew's story came back to me. Alicia and the strange man, wrapping Daniel in a blanket, dragging him out of the house. That long thing in the truck. I didn't dare think further, but the pain was like a sharp knife in my heart. A young officer standing beside him added, We've already checked the recordings from nearby traffic cameras. The truck appears at a couple of points, but then we lose track of it on the outskirts. We're already coordinating with patrols to search for it. I nodded, but I felt like my head was spinning. Are you sure that truck has something to do with it? I asked, my voice trembling. The chief looked at me, his eyes full of determination. It's circumstantial evidence, but it's very important, Mrs. Elena. We won't let any lead slip by. I felt a glimmer of hope, but at the same time, the fear of what they might find left me breathless. After the meeting, the chief suggested I go back with them to Daniel's house. I hesitated. I didn't want to face that place again, but I knew I couldn't run away. When we arrived, the yellow police tape was still blocking the door, a reminder of the nightmare that had happened. The forensics team was working inside, carefully collecting samples, taking photos of the scene. I stood on the porch, my gaze fixed on the dried coffee stain on the living room floor, where just a few days before I had entered and found everything destroyed. That coffee stain, along with the pieces of the cup, was like a scar that would never heal in my mind. Suddenly, an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rosa, approached, leaning on her cane, and whispered to me as if she were afraid someone would hear her. Elena, on the night of the rain, I heard a really bad fight at Daniel's house. Shouting, sounds of furniture moving. I wanted to call the police, but I was scared of getting into trouble. The woman lowered her head, her eyes full of guilt. I took her hand and said with a choked voice, "Thank you for telling me. Can you tell the police now?" Mrs. Rosa nodded and I took her to the young officer. He carefully wrote everything down, thanked her, and promised to investigate further. I watched Mrs. Rosa walk away, my heart heavy. I blamed myself, wondering if I had arrived sooner, if things would have been different. Before we left, the chief gave me a gentle pat on the shoulder and said in a low voice, "We're going to find that truck. Mrs. Elena, have faith." I nodded, but inside, I didn't know if I had any strength left for hope. I left the house. The sun was beating down, but my heart was cloudy, like it was about to rain. A few days after hearing Matthew's terrible story, I received a call from the police station. The chief's voice was as grave as ever, but with a hint of urgency. "Mrs. Elena, we found the address of the apartment building where Alicia was living. Do you want to come with us?" I looked at Matthew, who was sitting on the hospital bed, hugging his teddy bear and staring out the window with a lost look. I didn't want to leave him, but I knew I had to go. If there was any clue about Alicia, about what happened to Daniel, I had to see it with my own eyes. "I'll be right there," I replied, my voice trembling. I once again left Matthew with the young nurse, stroked his hair and whispered, "Grandma won't be long, Matthew. Be good, I'll be right back." The boy nodded weakly, but his gaze remained empty, as if he were in a place I couldn't reach. The alley leading to Alicia's building was in a forgotten corner of Austin, where the peeling walls smelled of dampness and car exhaust. I walked alongside 2 police officers, my steps heavy on the muddy path. My heart was pounding not from exhaustion, but from the fear of what I would find. When we arrived, the landlady, a middle-aged woman with a sour face, was sitting at the entrance, smoking a cigarette. As soon as she saw the police, she sighed in annoyance, as if she were already used to these problems. "That Alicia woman," she said, her voice full of irritation. "She left about 2 weeks ago, turned in her key and took off." Her words were like a blow to the chest. 2 weeks ago, exactly when Daniel disappeared, when his house turned into a scene of chaos. I stood there frozen, clutching my shawl to stay calm. The young officer, the tall and thin one, asked, "When she left, was she carrying a lot of stuff?" The landlady nodded, putting out her cigarette in an ashtray. "Yeah, a huge suitcase. She looked like she was in a real hurry, like she was running from something. Even hired some guy to give her a ride at night, didn't say anything except to pay." Just as we were about to leave, a strange man appeared at the end of the alley. He had a rough look, with a worn leather jacket and a face full of scars. He approached and asked the landlady in a gruff voice, "Is Alicia still here? I need to see her, it's urgent." The chief stopped him immediately with a look as cold as ice. "Who are you? What's your business with Mrs. Alicia?" The man stammered, clearly surprised, and tried to back away, but the young officer held him. After a moment of nervousness, he sighed, his voice annoyed. "I'm Ray, her loan shark. Alicia owes me a ton of money. She swore she'd pay me back in 2 weeks, but now she's nowhere to be found." The police and I looked at each other. No one said anything, but I knew we were all thinking the same thing. The moment Alicia fled, the moment Daniel disappeared, and now the promise of a large sum of money. It all fit together in a terrifying way. The young officer muttered as if asking himself, why would she be so sure she'd have a large amount of money in 2 weeks, if before she was so desperate she had to seek out her ex-husband? That question was like a knife in my heart. A bad feeling grew inside me, cold and cruel, making me tremble. There was something darker behind all this, and I feared the truth was even more painful than I had already imagined. That night I sat by Matthew's bed, the dim light from the hospital hallway illuminating his sleeping face. He was still hugging his teddy bear, as if it were the only thing anchoring him to this world. I took his hand, feeling the faint warmth of his skinny little fingers, and tried to calm myself. But then, like a flash of lightning in the dark, a vague memory surfaced in my mind, making my heart race. Many years ago, when Daniel and Alicia were still happy, Daniel proudly showed me a life insurance policy he had bought. "Mom, I want to protect my family," he told me, with his radiant smile. "If anything happens to me, Alicia and Matthew won't have to worry about a thing. The sole beneficiary back then was Alicia. And now, thinking about it, I realized that Daniel never mentioned changing the beneficiary's name after they divorced. That memory was like a stab in my heart. Alicia, with her huge debt and desperation, could she have set her sights on Daniel for the insurance money? I started to tremble, not from the cold, but from a horrible premonition that was suffocating me. I looked at Matthew, saw him whimpering in his sleep, his lips moving to call for his dad. I couldn't stay still for another second. The next morning, I called the chief, my voice trembling. I remembered something. Daniel had a life insurance policy, and Alicia was the sole beneficiary. Can you look into that? He was silent for a moment and then replied, Thank you, Mrs. Elena. That could be a key lead. We'll go to Mr. Daniel's house right now. I left Matthew with the nurse, asking her not to leave him alone, and went with the police to Daniel's house. As we entered, the yellow tape was still on the door, a reminder of the nightmare. The forensics team was gone, leaving the house cold and silent. The chief took me and a young officer to Daniel's study, where he used to sort his papers. They went through the filing cabinet, checking every folder, while I stood there clutching my shawl, a knot in my stomach. After more than an hour, the young officer exclaimed, I found it! He was holding a blue folder, opened it, checked it, and passed it to the chief. He scanned it, then gently tapped the folder against the desk and said with contained anger, Here's the motive. I looked at the paper and saw Alicia's name printed clearly in the beneficiary section. My premonition was correct. Daniel, out of love and responsibility, had unintentionally left the path clear for Alicia to take advantage. I sank into a chair, tears streaming down my cheeks. Why didn't you change it, Daniel? I whispered, my voice choked. Why did you give her the chance? The chief placed a hand on my shoulder and said in a grave voice, Mrs. Elena, if Daniel died in an accident, Alicia would receive all the insurance money. With that amount, she could pay off all her debts and live comfortably. This is likely the reason he disappeared. His words were like a hammer blow to my head. I clenched my fists, an immense rage growing in my chest. Alicia had become a monster, willing to take Daniel's life for money. I remembered her look when she was young, when she smiled happily next to Daniel, and I wondered what had made her change so much. Ambition, desperation, or was she simply a person who had lost herself? That afternoon, when I returned to the hospital, the phone rang again. It was the chief, his voice more urgent. Mrs. Elena, we just received news from the investigation team. They found an abandoned cold storage warehouse on the outskirts, a place the loan shark gang uses for their illegal activities. We've already sent a special team there. I felt my heart race like a war drum. What do you suspect? I asked, my voice trembling. He hesitated. We're not sure, but it's possible that we might find some clue about Mr. Daniel. I sat by Matthew's bed, my hands shaking so much I couldn't hold a glass of water. That night, when Matthew was already asleep, the phone rang once more. I answered, my hand shaking so much I almost dropped it. The officer's voice on the other end was halting, as if he were choosing his words very carefully. Mrs. Elena, we found a body, a man, hidden in the cold storage warehouse. We suspect it's Mr. Daniel. I broke down, a lump in my throat, unable to say a word. My world fell apart. Daniel, the person I loved most, was now just a body in a cold warehouse. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, but only tears came out. Are you sure? I whispered, my voice breaking. We need you to come and identify him, he replied, his voice full of pity. But please, prepare yourself. The next morning, I went with the police to the morgue, feeling a terrible fear gripping my heart. On the way, sitting in the back of the patrol car, I clutched my shawl and stared out the window, seeing nothing but Daniel's face. I remembered his smile, the way he would tease me when I burned the corn cake. Mom, if you open a bakery, I'll be your first customer, he would say, his voice cheerful. Now, that smile was just a memory, and I was about to face a truth I didn't want to believe. When the car stopped in front of the morgue, I got out feeling like I was walking in a dream. The young officer, the one who had been with me these past few days, put a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Mrs. Elena, are you ready?" I nodded, though inside I knew I would never be ready. The door to the cold room opened and a blast of icy air with a chemical smell hit my face, making me shiver. The white sheet covering the gurney was slowly pulled back, and then I saw Daniel's face. Although it was pale, although it was changed by time and death, I recognized my son instantly. His thick eyebrows, his straight nose, and the lips I kissed so many times when he was a baby. It was still my Daniel. I burst into tears, falling to my knees on the floor, only able to say 2 words, "My son." I wanted to touch him, to hug him one last time, but my hands were shaking so much I couldn't lift them. The young officer helped me up, his voice full of sorrow. "We're so sorry. Mrs. Elena, please, sit here." But I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to do anything but scream at the world why my son had to be taken like this. When I had calmed down a bit, the medical examiner, a middle-aged man with a grave voice, approached. He was holding a folder and explained, "The victim died from severe head trauma, caused by a strong blow against a hard object. The time of death is estimated to be the night of the storm 2 weeks ago." His words confirmed what Matthew had told me about that terrible night when Daniel fell and lay motionless on the floor. I nodded, but every word he said was like a knife sinking deeper into my heart. "Thank you," I whispered, not quite sure why I was thanking him. Perhaps for the truth, as cruel as it was. The police didn't stop. They expanded the investigation, examining the pickup truck the security camera had recorded. The chief called me at noon, his voice full of determination. "Mrs. Elena, we found a blanket stained with red and a woman's jacket in the bed of the truck. DNA results confirm the stain is Mr. Daniel's blood, and the jacket belongs to Alicia." I collapsed into a chair in the hospital hallway, my hands on my chest. All the loose pieces now fit together, forming a picture of the crime so clear it was chilling. Alicia had really done it. She had taken Daniel's life. Using the statement from the loan shark we found at the apartment building, the police quickly arrested the unknown man who accompanied Alicia that night. They invited me to the station to watch the interrogation from outside through a one-way mirror. The man with his rough appearance at first denied everything, growling, "I don't know anything. I just gave her a ride." But when the police showed him the evidence, Alicia's jacket and the blanket found in the truck, his face turned pale and he started to sweat. The chief told him in a harsh voice, "Do you think we don't know you helped her hide the body? Talk if you don't want your sentence to be worse." Finally, to get a deal, he confessed where Alicia was hiding, an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city where she was holed up. I stood outside the interrogation room clutching my shawl, feeling the world spin. Alicia, the woman who once had dinner with my family who laughed with Matthew, was now a fugitive, carrying a crime on her shoulders. I remembered the last time I saw her, before she and Daniel got divorced. She looked at me with cold eyes. "Stay out of it, Elena. This is between Daniel and me." I tried to stop her, tried to tell her that Matthew needed his mother, but she just laughed bitterly. Now that laughter came back to my mind like a warning I had ignored. A few days after identifying Daniel's body, I received the news that the police had arrested Alicia. They caught her in a small copy shop, trying to forge documents to flee Austin. The chief called me, his voice was soft but firm. "Mrs. Elena, we have her. Do you want to come to the station?" I hesitated, looking at Matthew, who was drawing on the hospital bed, still hugging his teddy bear. "No," I replied, my voice choked. "I don't want to see her. Just make sure she doesn't escape." But in the end, as the police led Alicia down the station hallway, I watched from a distance, seeing her in handcuffs, her face gaunt and her hair disheveled. I felt a mix of rage and deep down a strange pity. Alicia, who was my daughter-in-law, who was Matthew's mother, had destroyed her own life and the lives of the people she loved most. The trial was held at the city courthouse, attracting the attention of the press and the public. I sat in the front row, holding Matthew's hand tightly, feeling his small hand tremble in mine. He didn't want to come, but I gently convinced him. "Matthew, we have to do this for your dad. Grandma will be right here with you. He nodded, but his eyes were still full of fear. The courtroom was packed. The air felt heavy, like a rope about to snap. The prosecutor, a tall man with a sharp voice, stood up and presented the evidence one by one. He played the recording of Matthew's statement, my grandson's small voice trembling as he recounted the night of the storm. Hearing it squeezed my heart, and I hugged Matthew tighter as he lowered his head, hiding his face in his bear. The prosecutor continued, showing photos of the blanket and Alicia's jacket found in the pickup truck. DNA results confirm the blood belongs to the victim, Mr. Daniel, he said, his voice cold. Then he projected the security camera footage, the blurry truck under the streetlight, carrying something long covered with a tarp. Finally, he held up the life insurance folder, pointing to Alicia's name as the beneficiary. This was the motive, he declared, his voice echoing in the room. The defendant planned a murder to collect the insurance money, pay off her debts, and live comfortably. I looked at Alicia, sitting at the defendant's table, her head bowed. At first, she tried to remain calm, avoiding everyone's gaze. But as the evidence was presented, she began to tremble. Suddenly, she jumped up and shouted, "I didn't mean to kill him! I just wanted my money." Her voice broke, but no one in the courtroom was moved. The prosecutor approached and refuted coldly, "If you only wanted money, why did you hide the body, stage a fake accident scene, and try to collect on a life insurance policy?" Alicia was speechless. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She turned to her accomplice, the rough man who was with her that night, and screamed, "It was him! He's the one who pushed Daniel!" The man immediately stood up, his face red with fury, and pointed at her. "You're the one who planned everything!" "I just did what you told me. You told me to push him to help you hide the body." The atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense, the murmurs of the crowd sounding like a wave. I hugged Matthew, feeling him tremble. "Grandma," he whispered in a tiny voice, "was it all my fault?" I stroked his hair, trying not to cry. "It wasn't your fault, Matthew. Your mom made a mistake, and she's going to have to pay for it." But inside, I knew those words couldn't heal the wound in Matthew's soul. After hours of deliberation, the judge, a woman with a serious expression, stood to give the verdict. Her voice was clear and firm. The defendant, Alicia, is found guilty of first-degree murder and fraud and is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The accomplice is found guilty of accessory to murder and concealment and is sentenced to 20 years in prison. When the sentence was read, I burst into tears, hugging Matthew with all my might. My tears were not just for the pain of losing Daniel, but also for the relief that justice, finally, had been served. Matthew hid his face in my chest, crying inconsolably, and I could only rub his back, whispering, "It's over, my boy. Your dad can rest in peace now." A few weeks later, I decided to close up Daniel's house for good. I couldn't go back to that place, once filled with the laughter of my son and grandson, and now just a painful memory. I took Matthew to live with me in my small town outside of Austin. I enrolled him in therapy, hoping that the wounds in his heart would slowly heal. Every night I sit by his side and tell him stories about Daniel, from when he was a boy, about how he always wanted me to be proud of him. "Your dad loved you so much, Matthew," I tell him, stroking his hair. "And Grandma does too." That night I sat by the window with Matthew asleep in my arms. The moonlight streamed in, soft like a comfort. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "My son, I promise you I will raise and protect Matthew for you. Justice has been served." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I felt a little bit of peace, as if Daniel was somewhere, smiling down at me. I hugged Matthew, knowing that although the pain of losing my son will never go away, I still have him, and I will spend the rest of my life taking care of him. Just as Daniel did. After everything we've been through, I want to say from the bottom of my heart to you, who have followed my story to this point, that love and care for family should never be taken for granted. A single oversight can lead to a tragedy with no turning back. Ambition and betrayal can turn your loved ones into strangers, but justice will always speak if you are persistent until the end. I learned that true strength comes when you stand up to protect those you love, even in the midst of the deepest pain. And above all, loss taught me to value every second together, because the love of family is the most valuable legacy we leave for the next generations. The story you have just heard has had names and locations changed to protect the identities of those involved. We don't tell it to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your own voice? I would like to know your opinion, because every story can become a light that illuminates the path for others. May God always bless you, and I'm sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the end screen, I'll leave you with 2 of the channel's favorite stories. I assure you they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.